I'm a graduate student here in the city of Chicago. I study the history of architecture and the history of sculpture, so I promise you're all in good hands. Now, today we're going to be talking about how these architects are artists in their own right. They're using line, weight, shape, and space to convey something to us, and they're using a variety of different materials to do so. Now, these folks are also social scientists. They're tapped into the culture and politics surrounding the construction of these buildings, and they incorporate that into the facade in many different ways. And third, and sometimes most importantly, these folks are also engineers. So we'll talk about the countless ways they make sure these buildings don't topple over, how they can build them taller and lighter and cheaper as well. We'll go on all three branches of Chicago's river, and I will share with you plenty of history during that time. This will feel a bit more like your home by the time we get back to this dock. But without further ado, I do want to get talking about some of these buildings. Take a look ahead of us over on the right-hand side. It's this tall white stone building with a clock tower. This is the Wrigley Building from the 1920s.
Ambitious project. Over the course of 8 years in the late 1800s, they dug a 27-mile-long canal, 21 feet deep, all the way past the Continental Divide west of us in Oak Park, Illinois.
Quite literally thinking outside of the box. As we pass underneath this bridge, take a look ahead of us over on the right at this rich red brick building. This is the Reed Murdoch Building from 1914. Now I want you to pay attention to the color of that brick. Take a look under those central windows. You'll see some wheat-like elements out of stone. Now that was meant to evoke the sense of the prairie here in the Midwest, a very rich agricultural region. Also very fitting for this building's original intention, a grocery storage warehouse. Now take a look towards the top. You'll see a clock tower. Others have nice wine bars. Now the last thing that you want if you're having a drink during happy hour is to see trash and pollution floating down the river in front of you. So we bring folks down to it, they start to interact with it, they begin to care a whole lot more about the ecology of this particular place. Here to the city of Chicago and taught architecture as well. One of his students, Bertrand Goldberg, designed the next series of towers we'll see ahead of us here on the right-hand side. Take a look at these two corn cob-shaped buildings on the right, Marina City from the 1960s. Now there's definitely a little bit of a fraught relationship between the student and the teacher, if you ask me. If Vandra wanted to pare things down to just their essentials, harsh right angles, cold dark steel, and dark glass, well, Goldberg turned to nature. He didn't see too many right angles in nature, and as such didn't incorporate them into his designs. He designed by Adrian Smith. Now this is a great example of a style of architecture called contextualism. What makes it a great example? Well, you'll see this mirrored glass. It's reflecting the buildings that are around it. Contextualist designs are site-specific and they flatter their context. You couldn't pick this building up and plop it anywhere in the world, it wouldn't make nearly as much sense. But Smith does not stop there. You'll notice this building also has several setbacks. Those line up to buildings around it. That first setback with the first roof line of the Wrigley Building. That second setback with the first roof line before the rocket ship shape of Mather Tower from the 1920s here on the left. And the third, the next building we'll talk about in just a moment here on the right. But you'll see time and time again these architects here in the city, they like their buildings to chat and relate to one another. Take a look now ahead of us over on the right at this tall black box building. This is the AMA Plaza building, formerly the IBM headquarters, for amenity to be enjoyed. But you'll notice that between their fences and the railing along the river, there's somewhere interesting that's literally just around the corner from our dock. Hop over there and check it out. Now it's a hotel, that means the lobby is public. I think interiors are just as important as exteriors when it comes to understanding these buildings. So I always say head into any of these lobbies. If you're not meant to be there, they're going to let you out. Otherwise, perhaps the sculptor of the time was thinking, well, this is going on top of the tallest building in the city. Might be a while before anyone notices I didn't carve this. But more than that, it really reflects the general architectural design philosophy as well, moving away from something hand-carved or paint into something much more machine-made and streamlined. This wouldn't meant to be an iteration of Michelangelo's David, painstakingly carved into marble hour after hour. No, it's meant to be a whole lot more like an Oscar, streamlined, featureless, cast entirely out of aluminum. As a fun piece of trivia for all of you, Oscar statues are actually manufactured here in the city of Chicago. As we head underneath this next bridge, I want you to also look on the right-hand side and see things turn them into apartments, that is rental units. Now Goldberg is one of my favorite architects here in the city, in part because of how he uses a material like concrete, one that we typically think of as very rough, sturdy, and imposing, in a very soft and biological way. That's hard to do with buildings, more so with a material like concrete. These are timeless. Sure, they read a bit 60s because they're somewhat futuristic, but you can imagine them in any place at any time. Not in the sense that they are stock buildings, of course not, because they don't stick out too much like a sore thumb. They blend quite nicely. Now, it is indeed an operable bridge. It's lowered once a year and a car is driven across it to say that it works. In doing so, we can claim that here in the city we have 37 movable or articulated bridges. What does that matter? It means we can say we have the second most movable or articulated bridges in the entire world, behind only Amsterdam. Now, we don't have nearly as museum on the south side of the other parks and bridges and cultural institutions there in Spain as well. Now, Chicago is here because of this river, and of course we're all in toward the river because of the river too. But for a while we're not treating it very well at all. Chicago's nickname, the White City, that's where we get that one. That was meant not only to inspire Chicagoans themselves, but all of the visitors of the World's Fair. Now, a whole lot debuted at that World's Fair. Cracker Jack, cream of wheat, PBR, the very first Ferris wheel, Heinz condiments, coupons, brownies. Now, perhaps the sculptor of the time was thinking, well, this is going on top of the tallest building in the city. Might be allowed for anyone notices I didn't carve this. But more than that, it really reflects the general art deco design philosophy as well, moving away from something hand-carved or paint into something much more machine-made and streamlined. This wouldn't have to be an iteration of Michelangelo's David, painstakingly carved into marble hour after hour. No, it's meant to be a whole lot more like an Oscar, streamlined, featureless, cast entirely out of aluminum. As a fun piece of trivia for all of you, Oscar statues are actually manufactured here in the city of Chicago. As we head underneath this next bridge, I wanted to also look on the right-hand side. We're going to see a pink granite building that begins as an octagon and ends as a hexagon with these crowns on the very top. Another good example of postmodernism, reminding us of the Queen chess piece itself. Now, when those crowns on the very top were lit up so bright at night when it first opened, birds were getting lost during the opera season because they thought this was the moon. So we turned them on during that period of time, made sure to replace those previously incandescent bulbs with much more energy efficient and also dimmer LED ones. We like to make sure we're taking care of the environment here in the city. Just ahead of that on air rights. What's that? Well, there are two private train companies, Metra and Amtrak, who own most of the land along the right-hand side of the south branch of Chicago's river, but they lease the air above to developers. So we end up with a building like this one here on the right, River Point from 2017. Now, it looks a bit like a glass and steel hot pocket, but the arch on the bottom is indeed structural. Needs to pinch the base of that building together. Now, the first that I want to share with you is about the Great Chicago Fire. Now, there are a lot of rumors, a lot of fiction surrounding this particular event, but I just want to give you all the facts. It was October 8, 1870. It hadn't rained in the city of Chicago for 14 weeks, a very long time. Most of the homes of that era were constructed out of wood. It was, of course, dry. Now, here in the city, it also gets very cold very quickly. Folks started to bring in their firewood as well. That, of course, just as dry. Bit of a recipe for disaster. And so in a barn just about 2 miles. Now, once we had secured that bit, the city enlisted the help of an architect by the name of Leo Burnett. Now, Burnett was a member of an architectural philosophy called the City Beautiful movement. These were folks who believed that classical art classified a grocery storage warehouse. Now, take a look towards the top, you'll see a clock tower. That was a bit of a branding move. In 1914, not everyone could afford a pocket watch. This was a great way for folks to know not only what time. Now, the city did such a great job turning them into apartments, that is, rental units. Now, Goldberg is one of my favorite architects here in the city, in part because of how he uses a material like concrete, one that we typically think of as very rough, sturdy, and imposing, in a very soft and biological way. That's hard to do with buildings, more so with a material like concrete. These are timeless. Sure, they read a bit 60s because they're somewhat futuristic, but you can imagine them in any place at any time. Not in the sense that they are stock buildings, of course not, because they don't stick out too much like a sore thumb. They blend quite nicely into this. It begins as an octagon and ends as a hexagon with these crowns on the very top. Another good example of postmodernism, reminding us of the Queen chess piece itself. Now, when those crowns on the very top were lit up so bright at night when it first opened, birds were getting lost during the opera season because they thought this was the moon. So we turned them all during that period of time, made sure to replace those previously incandescent bulbs with much more energy efficient and also dimmer LED ones. We like to make sure we're taking care of the environment here in the city. Just ahead of that, over here on the